It began with the sound of chainsaws, not at a construction site, not in a forest, but in a quiet suburban neighborhood, on a perfectly manicured street, where the loudest sound on most mornings was a lawnmower. That morning, however, residents of Maple Glen Estates awoke to the grinding roar of engines and the shriek of blades cutting into wood. At the center of it all was one woman, Patricia Whitmore, the self-appointed enforcer of the HOA board. With two hired contractors at her side, Patricia marched onto a neighbor's yard, without permission, and ordered the felling of a 60-year-old oak tree. Neighbors gasped, filmed on their phones, and shouted for her to stop. But Patricia didn't stop. And when the chainsaws bit through the roots and the oak fell with a crash, what spilled out of the earth wasn't just dirt. It was something buried. Something that had been hidden for decades. Something that would shock the entire community and unravel a mystery no one in Maple Glen was prepared to face. Maple Glen Estate sat on the outskirts of Raleigh, North Carolina, a suburban development built in the 1980s, marketed to middle-class families chasing the dream of cul-de-sacs, safety, and green lawns. Every house looked alike in its own way. Two-story brick or siding, trimmed hedges, basketball hoops, American flags on porches. But like many HOAs, Maple Glen was less about harmony and more about control. For years, neighbors whispered that the HOA board, led by Patricia Whitmore, wielded fines and threats like weapons. Paint your fence the wrong shade? $250 fine. Park your car in the street too long? $100 fine. Holiday decorations up too early? Expect a letter. But the McCarthy family, David, his wife Lillian, and their teenage daughter Emily, had always managed to avoid conflict. Their property was well kept, their dues always paid. The only point of friction? The oak tree. The McCarthy's oak tree stood in their front yard, tall and broad, older than the neighborhood itself. Its branches stretched over the street, casting shade in summer. Kids loved climbing it, carving their initials into its bark. But Patricia hated it. She claimed its roots threatened the sidewalk, that it dropped too many leaves, that it was unsightly compared to the uniform maples planted by the HOA. For years, she pressured McCarthy's to remove it. Each time, David refused. "It's healthy," he told her in one HOA meeting. "That tree's been here longer than you, longer than this neighborhood. It's not going anywhere." Patricia's lips curled into the thin smile neighbors had learned to fear. "We'll see," she said. On a crisp October morning, Patricia arrived at the McCarthy home with two contractors in neon vests. She waved HOA violation papers like a weapon. "This tree is a hazard," she declared. "The HOA board has voted. It comes down today." David stormed out in his robe. "You don't have the right. This is private property." But Patricia ignored him. She pointed, and the men started their saws. Neighbors emerged, phones recording, voices rising in protest. The saws roared. The oak trembled. And then, with a cracking groan, it fell. The ground shuddered as the tree came down, pulling up a web of roots. Beneath the soil, something glinted. At first, everyone thought it was just old metal. But as dust cleared, the truth emerged. Fragments of bone, rusted chains, and a small, rotted wooden box, split open by the force of fall. Gasps turned to screams. One neighbor shouted, "Oh my God, that's a skull!" David fell to his knees. Emily clutched her mother's hand, sobbing. Patricia's smirk vanished, replaced with something else. Something darker. She whispered, almost to herself, "I told them it would come out eventually." Within an hour, Maple Glen was swarming with police. Yellow tape cordoned off the McCarthy's yard. Detective Alan Brewer, a veteran with salt and pepper hair and a skeptical gaze, took lead. He crouched by the site, brushing dirt from a box. Inside lay old photographs, water-damaged but legible. The photos showed children, pale, wide-eyed, dressed in what looked like 1970s clothes. One picture in particular made Brewer's stomach turn. It showed a group of kids standing under the same oak tree, smiling stiffly. Behind them, a man's shadow stretched long across the lawn. By nightfall, the cul-de-sac was buzzing. Neighbors gathered in whispers. Some claimed the bones were Native American. Others muttered about mob connections. But one older resident, Mrs. Hayes, shook her head. "I've lived here since '85, she said. "That tree was here before Maple Glen, before the houses, and before Patricia." "What are you saying?" another neighbor asked. Mrs. Hayes leaned in. "I'm saying there are stories about this land. Stories about children who went missing." Detective Brewer called Patricia in for questioning. She arrived in her pastel cardigan, pearls gleaming, posture perfect. When asked why she cut down the tree, she gave her a hurt smile. "I was simply following HOA guidelines, Detective. That tree was a hazard. Ask anyone." But Brewer noticed something off. Her hands trembled ever so slightly, and when he pressed her about the bones, she snapped. "I knew this would happen. I told them years ago. That tree, it's cursed." Her outburst silenced the room. Forensic teams confirmed. The bones belonged to at least 2 children, aged between 8 and 12. Estimated time of death, late 1970s, which meant they were buried long before Maple Glen Estates was built. But here was the real shocker. Dental records matched missing children from Raleigh, 1978. 2 siblings, Thomas and Claire Bennett. Their case had gone cold over 40 years ago. And now, their remains had surfaced in a suburban front yard. One neighbor, curious, checked his home security footage of Patricia's arrival that morning. At first, it showed nothing unusual. Patricia yelling, the contractor sawing. But when the tree began to fall, Patricia's face lit up. Not with shock, not with fear, with satisfaction. It was as if she'd known what was buried there all along. Detective Brewer stood in his office late that night. Photos of the Bennett children spread across his desk. He rubbed his temples. Why would Patricia want that tree down now? After all these years? His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. It read, "Check the other trees. She's not finished." Brewer's blood ran cold, because in Maple Glen Estates, there were dozens of trees, and nobody knew what might be buried beneath them. News vans descended on Maple Glen within 24 hours. Reporters swarmed the cul-de-sac, microphones shoved toward shaken residents. One neighbor, caught on camera, summed it up, "We bought homes here thinking it was safe. Now we're finding out the land itself is hiding secrets. What else is buried under our feet?" Children weren't allowed outside. Families sat glued to the news. And Patricia? Patricia walked her poodle every morning like nothing had happened, lips pursed, chin high, as though she were enjoying the attention. Detective Alan Brewer called Patricia back in for a second round of questioning. This time, he didn't bother with pleasantries. "Mrs. Whitmore, did you know what was under that oak?" Patricia's smirk never wavered. "Detective, I warned this community about that tree for years. Nobody listened. Don't punish me for being right." Brewer slid photos across the table. The Bennett children, smiling stiffly under the same oak in 1978. Patricia glanced at them, unbothered. "Cute kids, but I never met them." Brewer leaned in. "You said the tree was cursed. Why?" Her eyes flickered. For a moment, Brewer thought he saw fear. But then the mask returned. "Because," Patricia said calmly, "every tree in this neighborhood has a story." Brewer's team began examining records of Maple Glen Estates. What they found was disturbing. The subdivision was built on land once owned by the old Hartwell farm, abandoned in the late 1970s. Several police reports from that time referenced missing children in the area. But the files ended abruptly. No suspects, no follow-ups. And then Brewer uncovered something stranger. The land sale papers bore a familiar signature. Leonard Whitmore, Patricia's late husband. Leonard had been a real estate developer in the 1980s. He'd purchased the Hartwell land cheap after the farm was foreclosed. He then helped found Maple Glen Estates, marketing it as a safe, family-oriented community. But Brewer learned Leonard had once been questioned in connection with the Bennett disappearance. He was never charged. Patricia's rise to HOA power after his death suddenly looked less like civic duty and more like guarding a secret. 2 days later, construction crews were ordered to halt sidewalk repairs near Maple Glen's playground. A worker's shovel struck something hard. It wasn't rock. It was another wooden box. Inside lay small shoes, rusted toys, and more bones, this time, of a single child no older than 6. The dental match came quickly. Angela Ruiz, missing since 1979. Panic spread like wildfire. 3 children now confirmed dead, all within Maple Glen's borders. And Patricia's calm facade started to crack. Neighbors turned on Patricia overnight. Crowds gathered outside her pristine white home, chanting, "Murderer! Witch! What are you hiding?" Police had to block off her driveway as tensions rose. But Patricia still showed no remorse. "You're all so ungrateful," she hissed at reporters. "If it weren't for me, you'd still be living on cursed land without knowing it." Her words only fueled suspicion. Late one night, Brewer sat with old maps of Hartwell Farm. He noticed the trees weren't random. Each large oak or maple in the neighborhood sat exactly where barns, silos, or wells once stood. And if the Bennett children and Angela Ruiz had been found beneath them, it meant the killer was hiding victims in old farm foundations, planting trees above as cover. But who would have known the farm layout so well? The answer pointed back to the Whitmores. Meanwhile, Emily McCarthy, the teenager whose yard had revealed the first bodies, found something strange. Scrolling TikTok, she came across a grainy clip from 1983, uploaded by a local history channel. It showed a ribbon-cutting ceremony for Maple Glen's grand opening. There was Leonard Whitmore, smiling for cameras. And just behind him, Patricia, much younger but unmistakable. On her lapel was a pin in the shape of an oak tree. The camera zoomed in just as she whispered something to Leonard. Emily froze the frame. Patricia's lips were mouthing 2 words. "It's safe." The same unknown number texted Brewer again. This time, a video file. It showed grainy surveillance footage of Patricia late at night, standing by another tree 2 blocks from McCarthy's. She wasn't walking her dog. She was digging and burying something. The file cut off before revealing what. Brewer's gut turned cold. Was Patricia planning new evidence? Or hiding something from the past resurfacing? Brewer requested a warrant to excavate the tree Patricia was caught near. As crews prepared, Patricia suddenly vanished. Her house was empty. Closet bare. Car gone. On the kitchen counter, a note. "You're looking in the wrong place. The tree you want is mine." Brewer looked out the window toward Patricia's yard. There, towering above her pristine lawn, stood the oldest oak in Maple Glen. The one she had never complained about. The one she had fiercely protected. And if the anonymous source was right, it was hiding the darkest secret of all. When officers entered Patricia's pristine colonial home, they found everything in order. Almost 2 in order. No dishes in the sink. No stray clothing. Not even mail on the counter. It was like she had been preparing to leave for weeks. In the master bedroom, one thing stood out, a locked cedar chest at the foot of the bed. Inside were HOA documents going back 40 years, meticulously filed, and dozens of photographs of neighborhood children playing yards, riding bikes, climbing trees. Detective Brewer sifted through them, unsettled. Every child seemed to be smiling, but their eyes told another story. By sunrise, crews were ready to dig around Patricia's prized oak. Neighbors gathered behind police tape, whispering, clutching coffee mugs. For years, Patricia had fined others for unsightly yards, but her oak was the one thing she defended. When others were pressured to cut or trim, she had spared hers. Now, everyone wondered why. Detective Brewer gave the nod. Backhoes scraped the soil. Shovels dug deeper. And within an hour, the digging team stopped. They had found something. Beneath Patricia's oak lay a stone-lined pit about 6 feet wide. Inside, bones. Dozens of them. Not just 2 children, not 3. At least 10 distinct sets of remains. Some were older, brittle, nearly dust. Others were preserved just enough for forensic estimates. The ages ranged from 5 to 14. The pit wasn't a grave. It was a vault. Brewer's stomach knotted. This wasn't random. Someone had been using Patricia's yard as a dumping ground for years. When word spread, panic erupted. Parents yanked their children out of Maple Glen. Houses went up for sale overnight. Protesters demanded Maple Glen be demolished, calling it a neighborhood built on bones. And everywhere Patricia's name was spoken, it was with venom. Murderer. Witch. Monster. But Brewer wasn't convinced. Yes, Patricia was involved, but the pattern of burial, spanning decades, suggested something more organized. Digging deeper into Leonard Whitmore's past, Brewer uncovered old farm transaction logs. Leonard hadn't just bought Hartwell Farm. He bought 3 other abandoned properties around Raleigh. And on each property, large oaks had been planted soon after. Brewer whispered to himself, "The trees are markers." Could Leonard have been the one using them as cover? If so, Patricia's role might have been less killer and more keeper. Just as the case seemed to stall, a breakthrough arrived. An elderly man, Franklin Dorsey, called Brewer, claiming he had once worked as a farmhand at Hartwell in the 1970s. Brewer met him in a small diner. Franklin's hands shook as he spoke. "I saw him," Franklin whispered. "Leonard, he used to bring kids to the farm. Said he was helping them, giving them chores, teaching them discipline. But then some of them never went home." Brewer pressed. "Why didn't you report it?" Franklin's eyes filled with tears. "I did, but the sheriff back then was Leonard's friend." The case disappeared. Forensic teams searching Patricia's home found a hidden compartment behind her pantry wall. Inside was a journal. Patricia's neat handwriting filled the pages. Dates, names, cryptic notes. May 1981, another one under Leonard's watch. July 1983 warned him, but he won't stop. October 1985, Maple Glen opening. Safe for now. 1992, they keep asking about the trees. I tell them they're cursed. The last entry, dated 2 weeks before the oak was cut. The roots will betray us. Must keep control. Must silence dissent. Brewer read the line again and again. Patricia hadn't been afraid of the truth being buried. She was afraid of it being unearthed. As paranoia grew, neighbors began accusing one another. Mr. Caldwell, who had lived on the street since the 80s, was accused of helping Leonard dig. Mrs. Rivera, who babysat children during that time, was whispered about as delivering them to the Whitmores. The HOA meetings dissolved into chaos. Families screamed at each other across folding tables. Maple Glen wasn't just a neighborhood anymore. It was a crime scene. Then came another anonymous text, this time to Brewer's personal phone. A single line, "She's in the farmhouse." Brewer froze. The old Hartwell farmhouse had been condemned for years, boarded up, rumored to be haunted. If Patricia had returned there, it meant she wasn't running. She was going back to where it all began. That night, Brewer and a small tactical team approached the Hartwell farmhouse, moonlight spilling over its sagging roof. The front door creaked open. Inside, dust and cobwebs coated broken furniture. The air smelled of mildew and something worse, something metallic. In the center of the living room sat a rocking chair, and on it, facing the door, was Patricia Whitmore, her scarf immaculate, her cardigan pressed, her expression eerily calm. She looked directly at Brewer and said, "You finally came. Now, let me show you what Leonard built." The floorboards groaned beneath her chair, revealing a trapdoor at her feet. The farmhouse was silent, except for Patricia's steady rocking. Detective Brewer's flashlight swept across the warped floorboards. The trapdoor beneath her chair looked old, but reinforced with iron brackets. Brewer raised his gun. "Step aside, Patricia." But Patricia just smiled, rising slowly, her pearls catching the moonlight through the window. "I've waited 40 years for someone to look," she whispered. Her calmness unnerved even the seasoned officers. 2 men pried the trapdoor open. A rush of cold, stale air burst upward. The darkness below yawned like an open grave. Brewer and 2 officers descended a narrow wooden staircase, beams creaking under their weight. The smell grew stronger, damp earth rust, and something metallic. Their flashlights revealed stone walls reinforced with rotting timber. At the base was a long corridor, hand-dug, stretching into blackness. On the walls, carved crudely into the dirt, were names. Claire, Thomas, Angela, and more they didn't recognize. Brewer's chest tightened. This wasn't just a tunnel. It was a tomb. The corridor opened into a large underground chamber, ceilings shored up with beams. And there, against the walls, were dozens of wooden crates stacked in neat rows. Brewer approached cautiously, prying one open. Inside, children's clothing, toys, shoes, rusted bicycles, artifacts alive stolen. Another crate held bones, carefully arranged like specimens. One officer gagged, turning away. Patricia's voice echoed from above. You see? Leonard wanted them remembered. He wasn't cruel. He was a collector. When Brewer returned upstairs, Patricia was still smiling faintly, as if she'd won something. She spoke softly, almost reverently. Leonard said the land called to him. The farm was hungry. The children, they were offerings. He gave them to the soil so the community could grow. Brewer slammed his fist against the wall. They were children, not sacrifices. Patricia tilted her head. And yet, Maple Glen thrived. Do you think that was an accident? Safety, prosperity, property values, all bought with roots watered in blood. Her calmness sent shivers down Brewer's spine. In the chamber, detectives found binders wrapped in oilcloth to preserve them. Inside were records in Leonard handwriting, dates, initials, and locations marked with crude maps. Each map corresponded to a tree planted in Maple Glen. Every tree, a grave marker. But one map stood out. It marked not Maple Glen, but another subdivision across town, one that Leonard had also developed. Brewer muttered under his breath. This isn't just Maple Glen. It's bigger. News of the farmhouse discovery spread fast. Residents of Maple Glen were horrified. Some packed and left overnight. Others turned violent. Patricia's house was vandalized with spray paint, which, killer, curse. Fights broke out in HOA meetings, neighbors accusing each other of knowing the truth all along. One man shouted, "You all paid dues. You kept her in power. That makes you complicit." Maple Glen had become unlivable, a neighborhood collapsing under the weight of its own secrets. Detective Brewer sat in his office. Files spread out, photos of bones and crates covering the walls. His partner asked quietly, "So what do we charge her with? Accessory? Obstruction? Or is she just the widow of a monster?" Brewer rubbed his temples. Patricia hadn't killed anyone herself, or at least not yet proven, but she had concealed evidence for decades, and the anonymous text proved someone else was still moving in the shadows. This wasn't just Leonard's legacy. Someone had kept it alive. Then came a breakthrough. A woman named Margaret Allen called Brewer after seeing the news. She claimed she had lived on Hartwell Farm as a child and had barely escaped Leonard's grasp. In a tearful interview, she described being lured to the farm with promises of food and games. One night, he locked us in the barn. Me, Claire, Thomas, Angela. But I slipped through a window. I ran. I never saw them again. Brewer asked, "Did you tell anyone?" Margaret nodded. "My parents. But Leonard had friends in high places. The sheriff called me a liar, said kids just run away." Her story aligned perfectly with the timeline. Back in custody, Patricia's composure finally cracked. She screamed at Brewer across the interrogation table. "You don't understand. Leonard loved those children. He gave them purpose." Brewer slammed his hand down. "He murdered them." Patricia's face twisted with rage and grief. "He built a community. He made something eternal. And now you'll tear it all down because you can't see the vision." Tears streamed down her face for the first time. Brewer stared at her, realizing Patricia wasn't just complicit. She was indoctrinated. That night, Brewer returned to the farmhouse chamber with his team, searching for more. In one crate, tucked among bones, they found a sealed envelope. On it, scrawled in Leonard's handwriting, "For Patricia, if they ever dig." Inside was a note. "The trees are not the end. The soil runs deeper. The foundation stretches farther. If you're reading this, they've found me, but they haven't found everything. Follow the map. Keep the roots alive." Attached was another hand-drawn map. It didn't point to Maple Glen. It pointed to 3 other neighborhoods in North Carolina. Brewer stared at the map in stunned silence. Patricia smiled faintly through her tears. "You see, Detective, Leonard wasn't just building homes. He was building a network." Brewer crumpled a note in his hand, his heart pounding. If the map was real, Maple Glen wasn't unique. There were other neighborhoods, other trees, other graves. And as his phone buzzed, another anonymous text flashed on the screen. Start with Willow Creek. She's already there. Brewer looked up sharply. She... The message ended with a single word. Patricia. But Patricia was sitting in his custody, which meant someone else was carrying on the Whitmore legacy. Willow Creek sat 30 miles south of Maple Glen, a newer development built in the early 1990s. Like Maple Glen, it was marketed as safe, suburban paradise, trim lawns, playgrounds, walking trails. But beneath the perfect symmetry, there were whispers. Several families had left abruptly over the years. A handful of children were said to have moved away under strange circumstances. And its HOA president, Caroline Hightower, was a figure of fear. Neighbors describe her as Patricia Reborn. Pearls, cardigans, a permanent scowl, and an obsession with rules. But there was one detail that chilled Brewer when he saw her file. Caroline had been Leonard Whitmore's secretary in the 1980s. Back in Raleigh, Brewer confronted Patricia in her cell. You said, Leonard built more than one neighborhood. Who else knew? Who did he train to carry this on? Patricia's eyes twinkled with something close to pride. You think I was the only one, detective? Leonard was a visionary. He planted seeds. And now, they bloom in many places. Brewer slammed a photo of Caroline on the table. This woman, Hightower, did she help him? Patricia's lips curled faintly. Caroline was always loyal. She wouldn't say more. Armed with a warrant, Brewer's team began excavating a willow tree in the Willow Creek Community Park. A tree circled on Leonard's hand-drawn map. At first, residents protested. It's just a tree. You're scaring our kids. But when shovels hit earth, the truth returned. Beneath the roots were more remains. A small skeleton curled in a fetal position, clutching a rusted lunchbox. The name etched faintly into the metal. Eddie, 1994. Police checked missing persons. A boy named Edward Lawson, age 9, had vanished in Willow Creek that same year. The neighborhood gasped. It was happening again. Brewer brought Caroline in. She arrived in a pastel blue suit, pearl earrings gleaming, posture rigid. Her voice was smooth, authoritative. This is ridiculous. Patricia Whitmore was a lunatic. If she dragged your detectives into her fantasies, that's on you. But Willow Creek is not Maple Glen. Brewer slid photos of the unearthed bones across the table. Caroline's hand twitched. For the briefest second, fear cracked her mask. But she recovered quickly, icy smile returning. Children go missing, detective. Always have. Always will. Don't hang tragedies on landscaping. That night, Brewer reviewed security footage of Caroline's interrogation. At one point, she adjusted her scarf. Pinned to her lapel was a small silver brooch, shaped like a willow tree. Brewer's gut tightened. Leonard's journals had mentioned keepers of the grove, those trusted to maintain the burial sites. Caroline wasn't just HOA president. She was carrying the legacy. As news of the Willow Creek discovery spread, residents erupted. Meetings turned into shouting matches. Parents demanded answers. Some accused Caroline directly. Others begged police to protect her, claiming she'd always kept the neighborhood safe. Whispers of cult-like loyalty emerged. Some said Caroline hosted secret board meetings at night that weren't about dues or bylaws, but something older. The word sacrifice floated in hushed tones. Back in her cell, Patricia requested to see Brewer again. When he arrived, she leaned close and whispered. Caroline was always Leonard's favorite. I was the wife, but she understood his vision. She believed in it. She still does. Brewer pressed. What's the vision? Patricia's eyes gleamed. To root out the weak. To build strong communities on sacrifice. Children's innocence feeds the soil. Grows the neighborhood strong. Brewer recoiled, disgusted, but Patricia only smiled. And if Caroline has taken it further, detective, you'll find more than bones. Late one night, Brewer received a call from the same unknown number that had guided him before. This time, the voice was female. You're too late, detective. Caroline already knows you're digging. She's moved them. Brewer's hand tightened around the phone. Moved who? The line crackled. The children still alive. And then it went dead. Brewer launched a frantic search. Old HOA records revealed Caroline had authority over several locked storage sheds near the Willow Creek trails. When police raided the sheds, they found them empty. Dust, cobwebs, broken tools. But one thing remained. Chalk drawings on the wall. Stick figures of children. Some smiling. Some crossed out with excess. Beneath them, scrawled in shaky letters, "She feeds the trees." Brewer returned to Caroline's home with a new warrant. But when officers stormed in, the house was empty. On the dining room table sat a fresh binder labeled HOA Violations Willow Creek. Inside were pages of rules, fines, notices, and tucked at the back, a handwritten ledger. Each page listed a child's name, age, and a date. Some names had been crossed out, others circled. At the very end was a new entry, written just days ago. Ethan Morales, age 7, scheduled October 15th. Brewer's blood ran cold, because October 15th was tomorrow, and Ethan Morales was still alive. Detective Alan Brewer spread the ledger across the evidence table. His pen circled the words, Ethan Morales, October 15th. It was October 14th, 10:43 p.m. He muttered to himself, "We've got hours, not days." His partner, Detective Shaw, slammed a fist against the table. Where the hell is she keeping him? Brewer's mind raced. Caroline's house was empty, the storage sheds abandoned. But the ledger suggested ritual precision, the same kind of obsessive planning Leonard had done, which meant Caroline had a designated place, a place tied to the trees. The Morales home was chaos when Brewer arrived. Ethan's mother, Rosa, clutched a framed photo of her son, bright smile, missing front tooth. His soccer cleats still sat by the door. Rosa sobbed, "I told the HOA I want to cut down that willow by the park. Caroline, find us." She said the tree was heritage. I never understood why. Is that why she took him? Brewer crouched beside her, voice steady. "We're going to find Ethan. I promise you." But inside, he wasn't sure he could keep that promise. Back at HQ, analysts cross-referenced the ledger with missing child cases. Every circled name corresponded to a disappearance in Willow Creek. Dates lined up almost perfectly with HOA events, monthly meetings, landscaping inspections, even summer picnics. Brewer realized the horror. Caroline was using community gatherings as cover for abductions. But Ethan's date wasn't tied to an event. It was a Saturday, which meant something different, something ritualistic. Following Leonard's old maps again, Brewer noticed an unlabeled circle deep within Willow Creek's greenbelt, a patch of woods no one used, overgrown and fenced off. When officers cut to the wire, they found a hidden grove of trees. At the center stood a massive willow, its roots twisting into the earth like gnarled fingers. Around it were fresh shovel marks. And something else. Small children's shoes, neatly placed at the base of the trunk. Brewer's stomach dropped. This wasn't just a burial site. It was an altar. As dawn broke, a tip came in. A neighbor spotted Caroline's SUV near the grove at 3 a.m. Police swarmed the area. Dogs tracked scents through the underbrush. Half a mile in, they found a discarded scarf. Caroline's signature pastel. Farther along, rope fibers. A child's sock. The trail was hot. Brewer shouted, "She's moving him now. She knows we're close." Near the grove, AK-9 barked frantically at a patch of leaves. When officers dug, they uncovered a wooden hatch, half rotted but still functional. Brewer forced it open, flashlight cutting through darkness. Below was another tunnel, eerily similar to the one under the Hartwell farmhouse. Brewer descended, heart pounding. The tunnel smelled of damp soil and rot. On the walls were carvings, not names this time, but crude drawings of children holding hands around a tree. And deeper in, faint cries. A child's voice. Brewer sprinted forward, gun drawn. At the end of the tunnel was a small chamber lit by lanterns. And there, bound to a chair, was Ethan Morales, eyes wide gagged, tears streaking down his cheeks. Beside him stood Caroline Hightower, silk scarf immaculate, chainsaw resting at her side like a grotesque prop. Her voice was eerily calm. "You're too late, detective. The roots must be fed. Ethan is chosen, just like the others." Brewer leveled his gun. "Step away from him, Caroline." She tilted her head, smirking. "Kill me, and you kill the only one who knows where the rest are buried." Tension crackled in the chamber. Caroline's hand hovered near the chainsaw. Ethan whimpered. Brewer's finger tightened on the trigger. "You're not Leonard. You're just a fraud clinging to a dead man's madness." Caroline's eyes flashed. "No, detective. I'm his legacy." Then chaos. Caroline lunged, yanking the chainsaw's cord. It roared to life. Brewer fired. The shot ricocheted, missing her by inches. She slashed at the ropes, sparks flying. Ethan screamed. Caroline didn't attack Brewer. Instead, she plunged a chainsaw into the wall, opening a crude side passage Brewer hadn't noticed. Earth collapsed, dust choking the chamber. She disappeared into the darkness, her laughter echoing. Brewer cut Ethan free, scooping the boy into his arms. But as they scrambled up through the hatch, Brewer realized Caroline had escaped deeper into the tunnel system. And worse, she knew the layout better than anyone. Back at HQ, Ethan safe with his family, Brewer studied the ledger again. Something nagged at him. Flipping past the final page, he noticed faint indentations. Writing pressed through from a missing sheet. Using a pencil, he shaded the page. Words emerged. The roots spread farther. The foundation is nationwide. Protect the keepers. Brewer froze. If this was true, Leonard and Caroline hadn't just seeded Maple Glen and Willow Creek. There could be dozens of communities. Dozens of keepers. That night, Brewer returned home, exhausted. On his porch sat a package. No return address. Inside was a small willow branch, tied with twine, and a note written in elegant cursive. "Detective, you saved one. But can you save them all?" Say it. Brewer's pulse quickened. Caroline wasn't running. She was taunting him. And if the ledger was right, Ethan was just the beginning. For weeks, Brewer and his task force traced the ledger's clues. The names of other neighborhoods began to emerge. Willow Creek confirmed. Stonefield Ridge outside Charlotte. Riverbend Oaks near Asheville. Pine Hollow in Virginia, just across the border. Each tied back to developers linked to Leonard Whitmore. Each run by authoritarian HOA boards. And in each, missing children's cases have been filed. It was no longer a local crime. It was an organized system of control, hidden in plain sight. Then came a string of sightings. Caroline's SUV seen outside Riverbend Oaks. A pastel scarf recovered in Pine Hollow. A witness claimed to see her speaking to another HOA president in Stonefield Ridge. It was clear she was rallying the keepers, and the anonymous messages continued. One night Brewer's phone buzzed. "You're getting close, but you'll never cut down every tree." The task force set up surveillance at Stonefield Ridge, focusing on its HOA clubhouse, an imposing brick building. Late at night, vans arrived. Men and women in formal attire carried boxes inside. When police raided, they found the boxes filled with more ledgers, carefully cataloged names, dates, and burial markers. But Caroline slipped away again, leaving only her scarf tied to the clubhouse door. Brewer seethed. She was playing with them. In custody, Patricia Whitmore grew weaker, her health declining. On her deathbed, she summoned Brewer. Her voice cracked as she whispered. Leonard said, "Every tree was a pillar. Together, they hold something greater. Not just graves. A covenant. Break the pillars and the foundation falls." Brewer pressed her. "What foundation?" Patricia coughed blood, eyes glazing. "The community you trust. The roots you walk on. They're everywhere." She died before finishing, leaving Brewer with one final puzzle. Acting on Patricia's words, Brewer led a raid on Riverbend Oaks. Their Beneath its clubhouse, they discovered a massive root cellar filled with boxes of bones. Some dated back 50 years, others disturbingly fresh. And in the corner of the cellar, a shrine, a willow branch laid across a child's backpack, and a note scrawled in Caroline's elegant handwriting. Still behind, detective, always behind. The break came when a trucker spotted Caroline's SUV at a remote gas station near Pine Hollow. Brewer and his team raced intercept. At dawn, they cornered her near the tree line, her pastel cardigan torn, dirt on her hands. Caroline raised her palms, smiling coldly. You think killing me ends this? Leonard's vision isn't mine alone. There are others, always others. Brewer aimed his weapon. Then you'll be the last. Caroline lunged for concealed blade, but Brewer's shot rang out. She fell to the ground, breath ragged. As officers restrained her, she hissed one final warning. You can cut me down, but the trees will still stand. Her eyes closed. Caroline Hightower, Leonard's chosen successor, was dead. Excavations began across multiple neighborhoods. Hundreds of remains were recovered. Families finally received answers after decades of silence. The Department of Justice launched investigations into HOA corruption and developer ties. Brewer testified before Congress, calling the network the most elaborate suburban cult of the modern era. Communities once thought safe were now seen as graves built on foundations of horror. Months later, Brewer stood in Willow Creek's grove. The massive willow had been cut down. In its place stood a memorial stone etched with the names of the children found. Ethan Morales, holding his mother's hand, placed a toy car at the base of the stone. Brewer's chest tightened. He had saved Ethan. But how many more had been lost? Patricia's words echoed in his mind. The roots are everywhere. Back at HQ, Brewer received one last anonymous envelope. Inside was a photograph. It showed a new subdivision being built, model homes, cul-de-sacs, and in the center, freshly planted saplings. On the back of the photo was a handwritten message. Every new neighborhood begins with a tree. The keepers. Brewer's blood ran cold. Had they destroyed the network? Or had they only clipped one branch of a tree that would always regrow? Dear viewers, Maple Glen, Willow Creek, Riverbend Oaks, they were supposed to be symbols of safety, community, and family. But behind manicured lawns and HOA bylaws lay something darker. Control, secrecy, and sacrifice. It's a chilling reminder that evil doesn't always hide in shadows. Sometimes, it smiles at you from across the fence. Sometimes, it finds you for your grass. Sometimes, it plants a tree. So ask yourself this. The next time you move into a perfect neighborhood, will you wonder what's buried beneath its roots?